Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the show, Plant-Centered listener. My name is Ashley.
I'm Katie.
And today we have a very special guest for you today. As always, we love our guests. But we also have some exciting news to share. So Katie and I got notification last week on Tuesday, about 6 days ago. If you're listening to this on Monday, we got notified that we are ranked 37th in nutrition podcasts.
So exciting.
37. That is, I think that's the lowest we've ever been.
Yes, it's not like I watch it constantly. Yes, I do. We watch all the, they'll give us the listings in like America and Australia and all the kind of major English speaking areas. And we watch it diligently and we made a big jump, so we're very proud.
And part of the reason we made that jump is because we've had some amazing reviews lately, and so those reviews help propel us lower on the list, which lower is good. The closer we can get to number one, the better. Less keto people in front of us. No, but it's something that is it's really exciting. So if you have like 1 extra minute to spare today, we would love it so much if you could just leave us a positive review, a 5-star review, because that will bump us lower and lower on the list. And hopefully we can break into the top 25 one of these days.
Yes. So for only being kind of on the air for a couple years, and being plant-based, that is very exciting. Think about, it's weight loss podcast.
Oh yeah.
Possibly, or like carnivores or keto.
Yep. There are a couple carnivores people.
So we are scraping up there slowly but surely. They're getting scared, I'm sure.
Yes. So Katie, something I did last weekend, or I guess the weekend before, so not this past weekend, but the weekend before, was I ran my first Spartan race.
You're such a beast.
I don't know if any of you have ever run a Spartan race or a Tough Mudder before, but they different type of race.
Tell me everything.
So I just did the 5K. I did it with my training partner, Rebecca. We work out together a lot during the week. We do CrossFit together. And we did this race. It was a 5K, but there are obstacles pretty often throughout the race. I can't remember how many there are total, but some of them, you're climbing up walls, you're on monkey bars, which Katie, I haven't done monkey bars since elementary school. You're on rings, like these rope climbs. You're like pulling stuff up. At one point, we had to carry buckets of rocks on our shoulders. Yes. It was.
I want to be the kind of person that comes up with these torturous things. That seems like a fun job.
At one point, we were like crawling through mud/water that was like a foot deep, and there was barbed wire above us. I mean, it was intense. So
what about fire? Did you have to fight?
At the very end, yes, there's this like huge thing of like this fire log that you jump over. So that was pretty fun. I think the best part though was there was a fire truck who had, because it was really hot. We were in Asheville, North Carolina. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning, and there was this fire truck towards the end of the race that was just like spraying water, and that was my favorite. It wasn't even an obstacle, but you could like stand there and just like rinse off and like cool down. That was my favorite non-obstacle.
I thought you were going to say your favorite part because there's firefighters there. That would have been my favorite part.
So it's a lot of fun. I would recommend it if that's something that kind of piques your curiosity or if that excites you at all. It was a good time.
I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Stepping out of your comfort zone.
Yes. I know you have some exciting things coming up.
Yeah. We have some family coming into town. So my nieces they're from Minnesota, and we don't get to see them that much. So they're coming for like a good 3 weeks. So we're going to be doing all kinds of crazy stuff. We have a nice mountain Airbnb that we'll do kind of as a big send off. So we'll get everybody all together, have family time,
That's exciting. So we have our like plant-based course, which I actually kind of like calling it a plant-based boot camp almost. I don't know why, but I was like, that sounds kind of cool. But anyways, it's our course that teaches you how to go plant-based in 30 days, which in a way that kind of is like a boot camp.
Yeah.
So we just want to remind you that that's available, and we have a special discount code specifically for you, our podcast listener, which is plant-based 2020, and that will get you 20% off the course, and the link is below. So if you're interested in going plant-based or just want more of like a step-by-step guide in how to go plant-based, that is a great course for you. We've also had actually several people who are vegan or even vegetarian recently join the course, who they're just wanting to eat more whole food plant-based or just make sure that they're getting everything they need in a predominantly plant-based diet. And we talk about that in the course as well. We also have some great experts in the course that talk about gut health. I think that's been a favorite resource for a lot of people, and a lot of other great tools. So
yeah, check it out. What are you waiting for? Take that step.
Yep. If you've been thinking about it, I think this is your sign.
Yeah, sure.
So let's talk about today's guest, who I just was honored to have on the show. Her name is Lucy, and she is a plant-based registered dietitian and health coach who helps chronic dieters learn how to eat large portions and also maintain or lose weight sustainably using a plant-based diet. She's a Californian turned Canadian, and she's a wife and mother. So we had a really interesting conversation. We talked about her transition to plant-based, and we talked a lot about actually schooling. So what it was like going to school in a conventional registered dietitian dietetics program that wasn't centered around plant-based eating, because her and I both weren't quite plant-based at the time. So we talk about our history and what that was like going through schooling and then being plant-based later on, and kind of what our hope is for the future of dietetics. We also talk about the USDA and the guidelines that are coming out for the United States in particular in 2025. We talk about what our hope is for those guidelines and what they're going to look like, because Mexico and Canada have recently put out their guidelines and they're much more plant forward than ours. So it was really interesting, especially now that she's in Canada, to kind of hear that perspective.
Oh, I'm so excited to hear that.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. And I told her, I was like, I kind of want you to come back when the guidelines come out in 2025 to talk about that more, because it'll be really interesting to see what happens. So we kind of talk about what our predictions are and our hopes are for that and the future of nutrition and dietetics in general. So it was a really interesting podcast. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. And I know we got a lot of dietitians out there in our podcast listener base. So hello, everybody.
Hello. Well, we appreciate you so much. And like we said at the beginning, if you could just spare one extra minute to leave us a review, that would mean so, so much. And it would bump us a little bit further ahead in the rankings, because we would love to break into the top 25 of nutrition podcasts in America. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, and it's not just about singing our praises. It's about getting plant-based, nutrition in front of as many people as possible. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yep. Yeah, because the lower we are, the more people see the podcast. They see that it's plant-based. It also gets our guests some messages out there. We just have such incredible guests and amazing stories. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Okay, let's bring on Lucy, and we hope you enjoy this interview.
Bye.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm originally from California, and I moved to Canada because of my husband. He's from here in Calgary, and I was just finishing up my graduate program at Loma Linda University, and it just sort of made sense for me to move here as opposed to him moving to California, especially with all the immigration stuff. It's a little bit easier coming this direction. So I moved here, but then unfortunately, I couldn't use my certificate or my credential for a while. So I had to go through a whole process of first getting permanent residence and then applying for my dietetics certification here. And so it took me probably close to 2 years. So in the meantime, I would just spent all that time just researching plant-based, because I knew that that's sort of the focus I wanted, and I wanted to be able to dive into whatever I was going to do next, which I was starting to get this feeling was going to be private practice. Mm-hmm. So I was just doing tons of research, and I hosted a class for my church that was on plant-based nutrition, and because I had already kind of known some of the benefits of plant-based after living with these Seventh-day Adventist missionaries, and they convinced me of everything that Dr. Greger was saying. I watched a lot of his videos and read his book, and so I was at that point when I was teaching that class, was thinking, well, I really need to live this out if I'm going to be teaching it to people. So that's sort of when me and my husband decided to go more officially plant-based. We were kind of vegetarian before.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. And then ever since, that's been about 4 years now. And ever since I'm just getting more and more into that. I was kind of a little bit more plant forward, and culturally I understand the sort of need/desire to sort of appease some people in our family and things like that. So my mother is Chinese, and she likes to cook us a lot of meat. She actually owns a butcher shop, which makes it extremely hard to convince her that meat is not healthy.
I bet.
I know. So I kind of like you growing up on an Angus farm, right?
Yep.
So yeah, we still have just a tiny bit of meat, or it's like mixed in with the food that we're eating, like the veggies and stuff like that. But the more I kind of learn and about the ethics of food and everything too, like the more I'm sort of erring towards vegan. So
Yep. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I
yeah.
definitely want to come back and hear more of your story, especially as you and your husband like kind of took this leap. When
Mm.
you moved to Canada, did you have to like retake the exam or anything, or was it just more of like getting that I guess certification to
Yeah,
practice?
I did have to take their version.
Oh,
So here in Canada, you're registered, or your credentials through your province, and so it wasn't like a great Canadian test, but it was like officiated by the province, and so I had to go up to the capital city, which is 3 hours away, and do a whole day of interviews and some like practicum kind of stuff, like where they had you do a mock counseling session and then take a written test. I actually
okay.
did great on everything except the written test. I like almost failed, and I was really
Oh,
I had like one question off, so I was like, well, thank God that I did not have to retake that because it was quite
no.
brutal. So yeah, after that it was like pretty smooth sailing into like getting my credential, and then
Okay.
from there was able to it was around the time that we were thinking of starting a family, so I wanted some flexibility with my hours. So I thought about going the traditional route of getting a job here with the hospital system, just so that one day maybe I could move into the public health sector because that's kind of more my passion, right? But
Yep.
let's just do the private practice, more
Yep.
flexibility, and that way I can just promote myself as plant-based and people can kind of find me because of
Yeah.
that.
So,
Yeah.
for those of you who might not be familiar with how the dietitian credential works, so what we have to do now, and this actually recently changed. So, as of January 1st, 2024, so it's coming up,
Mm.
they're now requiring that dietitians have some form of higher education, so either a master's or a doctorate to be able to sit for the exam. And obviously, you
Mm.
have to go through, when I was in school, we had to go through 20 or 1,200 hours of practicum of like shadowing another dietitian, which was a lot. I mean, that was extensive. It was
Yes. It's
two
like 11
full,
months.
it was, yeah, it was two
Yeah.
full summers worth. And then it was like an extra, like, couple months at the end of school. And then it was like sprinkled throughout. So a lot of extra hours there. And so then we're able to, once we graduate and get our master's or our doctorate, which is what is going to be the requirement moving forward, you're eligible to sit for the exam. And then from there, most states in the US require you to have like a licensure in that actual state to practice. And so it sounds like that's kind of similar for provinces up in Canada as well.
Yes, except for the higher education requirement. So
Okay.
as far as I know, they don't have any plans to require that. But it was definitely a factor in my deciding to do the master's level because I was like, well, if they're going to be pushing people to do that anyway, might as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm actually I'm sure there's mixed opinions out there on, this new requirement. I'm kind of glad it's being required. I feel like having a higher education could be really beneficial. But then there's also other opinions that I have that I don't know if I should share either. So,
I know. They're listening. No, just kidding.
yeah, I know exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely hard when you think about, well, now people are going to be less incentivized to go to school to become a
Yep.
dietitian, and more people are going to end up just being nutritionists, or they're going to go get online certificates, and they're not going to actually go through the rigorous process of becoming dietitians. But
Yes.
it means that people who are dietitians will have a lot more respect, and it's kind of like you're at the level of like a doctor, right? Because you have so much
Mm-hmm.
knowledge about something.
Yep.
So, weigh
Yeah.
the scale, but
Yep. Yeah. Definitely some pros and
yeah.
cons there.
Yeah.
So, what was school like? So, you went to school here in the States, you started in
Mhm.
San Diego, and
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, walk me through how that went.
Yeah, so it was actually funny. I wanted to go to this university, and so that's why I started looking at their list of majors, and I had no idea what dietetics was before then.
Yep.
This was like I was a junior in high school. And so I kind of, Googled it or whatever and was like, whoa, dietetics sounds kind of interesting. Like nutrition, like helping people that way. That sounds I love cooking and I liked baking a lot growing up, which is kind of ironic because that's not super healthy, but
Yeah. Yep.
I love being in the kitchen. And so I thought maybe this would be a good fit for me. And so I went and I talked to the professors there, and I was definitely intimidated by all the requirements. They're like, yep, this is one of the hardest majors. You have the most classes you have to take out of all the majors, like almost all of the majors at the university. So you're pretty much going to have like a 7 class load every single semester. And or maybe 5, but it was still pretty intense. And then you have
Yes.
to take all these, classes like organic chemistry and all these biology classes. And so I was a little bit nervous, and maybe thought, at that point, maybe I should just do nutrition because it's not quite as hard. But yeah, I pushed myself, and once I started going in the classes, I absolutely fell in love with nutrition and thought it was the best thing ever. And I definitely remember there being more of an emphasis on just sort of everything in moderation and everything's healthy. Like, it's one of the messages or mottos of the academy is that, there's no good or bad foods. And so that's kind of what I remember learning is like, everything's good.
Yep,
Maybe there's some things you don't want to eat very much of, but it doesn't mean that they're bad food. And I totally remember, like, I actually ate super healthy in college, because like you're taking these classes and it's like right there in front of you, and then you go to the cafeteria and you're trying to build your plate with like lots of healthy veggies and whole grains, and so I ate really healthy, but I definitely indulged in all my favorite, like, ice cream and treats at the end of
yep.
hard meals. And we would always joke because you'd be sitting with like other dietetic students and we'd have like a plate of French fries, and then you'd see other people, like other girls that weren't studying nutrition, who had like just big salads.
Yes.
You're like, it's because we're dietitians that we feel okay eating French fries. It's because we know it's like all good for us, it's all like everything in moderation. So then when I was it was coming time to decide what I was going to do about my internship. That's also a kind of intimidating process where you fill out these applications, or this big application, and you list kind of your top locations that you would like, and then they review it and they decide whether they want you or not. So you could pick like 4 locations and have none of them decide that you're desirable, and that's kind of intimidating. So then I had heard about the program at Loma Linda University, which was a master's combined with internship. And I was like, well, that sounds way easier because they just kind of do it for you.
Yep.
And you don't have to. And it's already like, if you're going to be doing an internship for a year, you might as well just add another year of school in there and get your master's. So, and it was close to where my parents lived, so I knew I could just go home and live with them while I went to graduate school. So, yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there. And then, like I said, because they're Seventh-day Adventist, and that's like, that's one of the previous blue zones. I'm not sure that it's officially a blue zone anymore because so many people have moved in there, but used to be. And so that's where all this research comes from. And like I said, I had the professor, Joan Sabate, who is the author of all those major papers. And, but I have to say, they're not the most like evangelistic in a sense. Like they definitely tell you about the health benefits of eating vegetarian, but it wasn't very convincing, I will say.
Ah, okay.
So, yeah.
Was there anything in particular that wasn't super convincing about it, maybe at the time?
I don't know if it was sort of like I'd just been taught those 4 years in undergrad that like really everything's healthy. And so it took a while for me to kind of unwire my brain to think that way. And so, like I said, I was convinced like, okay, maybe red meat isn't the healthiest thing, so I should cut back on that. And so I was thinking, lean meats, but lean meats are totally healthy and fine. So, but when I think back to what I was actually eating in graduate school, like I had probably the worst diet ever because like I just remember eating lots of cheese and dairy and like easy things, and I got so iron deficient at that point because I was cutting back on meats, just relying a lot on dairy and stuff, and I ended up getting iron deficient. So definitely not a highlight of my eating career, even though I was studying nutrition. So
I know, exactly. And well, I think it's good to highlight those things because I feel like there is a lot of pressure. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves as dietitians to kind of eat the quote perfect diet, or like, sort of live out this quote perfect life or perfect way of eating and not have any nutrition deficiencies and all those things. I think it's good to just be honest about like, hey, my diet is not perfect and no one's is. We're human. And hey, we get nutrient deficiencies, or we have to pay attention, or different things like that. I feel like that's a good perspective as well to have. Like you said, Loma Linda was at least one of the original blue zones. I'm also not sure if they still are, but was the school more set up to a more like plant-based diet, or what was that like there?
Yeah, actually, so their cafeteria is all vegetarian. When I went to like a potluck with my professors, like all their food was like, stuff that I would love today. Like it's just so colorful and whole grains and all these things. And I was kind of like, this is a little bit too healthy for me back then. But yeah, they definitely walked the talk. They were all like plant-based, and probably more whole foods plant-based than anything, because some Seventh-day Adventists are a little bit more vegetarian or flexitarian, where they may have a little bit of fish or whatever it is. But yeah, all my professors, like when I actually saw what they cooked on a day-to-day basis, I was, oh yeah, these guys are like whole foods, plant-based, it's very healthy. And and then they had their store, like the Adventist grocery store there, that was fun to explore because that's all like no meat, no, they had eggs and milk, obviously because people are vegetarian, but no meat. And they have a lot of like their own products that they've developed because Seventh-day Adventists have been, eating this way for so long, they kind of were before the trend of like all these mock meats and all this stuff.
Yep.
So they had like these cans of like textured vegetable protein like turned into stuff, and it was kind of always fun to explore. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
quite like a vegetarian version of Sprouts, I guess, like pretty
Okay.
healthy and lots of fresh produce and stuff. So
Yeah, that would be
yeah.
amazing. I know for a while there were people really pushing Whole Foods, and maybe there still are, to get rid of their meat, to not sell meat anymore. And I think that was when someone else was the owner, like maybe the original owner, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
If you want to let me know if I'm wrong, just DM me on Instagram. But
No, yeah.
I think there are, I mean, I've never been to a grocery store that I can recall where there wasn't any meat being sold, which is mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would just be so fascinating to walk into a store and not really see many animal products.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It was kind of laid out differently, right? Like they had this L-shaped, like their walls was just like glass. Well, so there was produce, and then there was like glass cases of like refrigerated or frozen stuff. But then yeah, all the aisles were just like dried products and nuts and seeds and these like cans of things, cans vegetables and fruits and stuff. And it was kind of like I remember there like feeling like there was a lot of space in the store because they weren't like
Hmm.
cramming the whole store full of like processed food, you know?
Yep.
And there wasn't like end caps on the end of the aisles full of like their, favorite, somebody paid to put their like, product there. So yeah, it was definitely kind of a different feel than a normal grocery store.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was interesting, yeah.
And going back to what you said earlier about, you were getting this message of eating more plant-based at Loma Linda, and you had
Hmm.
just come off of 4 years education at a different school, and
Hmm.
how you weren't, it sounds like you weren't quite ready to like fully receive that message, which I think is the
Yeah.
case for a lot of people before they go plant-based or vegan. You might
Hmm.
hear things, you might see things, but until you're ready to really embrace it or take in that information, I feel like there's kind of like this like little barrier or wall that's built up. It's like, no, I'm not ready yet. But I feel
Hmm.
like it always is a yet. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not ready yet. I know
Hmm.
that's how I was for a really long time. I still remember in grad school, I went over to this family's house. They were primarily vegan from what I understand, and she was cooking a vegan meal. I remember saying something, and I still regret this to this day, because I was in school, I was becoming a dietitian, I was getting my master's. I remember saying something about like, you need to be really careful feeding your kids vegan because they might not get all their nutrients. And looking back, I'm like, Ashley, what? I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And there was very little, especially with the school that I went to, there was very little emphasis on plant-based nutrition. And gosh,
Hmm.
plant-based was really just when I was in school. This is a long time ago, over 10 years.
Hmm.
The China study was just being published, and so this
Hmm.
information was really new for the most part. It wasn't as mainstream as it is now. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that was the same for you. I mean, obviously Loma Linda was a little bit different, but
Yes. But
yeah.
my undergraduate was, we just learned about vegetarian and vegan diets for the sake of, well, if you're counseling somebody, you need to make sure you know how
Yes.
to address their nutrient deficiencies. So it's like basically
Yep.
that's how you're programmed to think about them, is like, okay, they're healthy, but only if you do it well and make sure that they're getting all these things. And as a dietitian, you might need to counsel somebody to make sure that they're getting, a well-planned vegetarian diet or well-planned vegan diet. And
Yep.
I can attest to that, like like kind of going vegetarian, it's very easy to start relying so much on dairy and eggs that you don't actually pay attention to any of the really healthy whole foods. And so that's
Yep.
what happened to me, is like I just started relying on those things. And like my whole grains were like, I had oats because I remember making overnight oats a lot because I'd be like, I don't know what to bring to school for lunch today. And I would
Yeah.
just bring them. Um, I had those a lot, and I had, sandwiches and stuff like that, and cereal. But that's a whole nother separate challenge of living with your parents and then like wanting to eat a certain way, but like they're shopping for
Yeah.
things too. Um, so that was probably also a factor in all of it. But yeah, you do have to be careful. If you're following a vegetarian diet, it's very easy, I guess, to sort of rely on the animal products still, and then you don't make allowance for the fact that you actually do need a lot of greens and whole grains and beans to like meet your protein and your iron requirements, especially as a woman. So
Well, so
yeah.
how did it come about where you really decided to make the switch, or like to really like start transitioning fully?
Yeah, so I was in Malawi, Africa. I went there with my church actually, but then I wanted to stay longer because I mean, if you're traveling halfway around the world, you might as well try to stay there as long as you
Yep.
can. So I made a connection through my school. A woman that was sort of a counselor, academic counselor, she connected me to these missionaries, and she's like, "Yeah, one of she's a dietitian. Like maybe you can shadow her a bit and learn from her."
Oh,
And they worked at Adventist health complex, like in Malawi. So they had a little hospital, and she did do some nutrition counseling, but it wasn't like a lot. And so I shadowed her once or twice, I think. And then sort of the rest of the time, I was just like involved in sort of like the life there, and involved in her like preparing their food, because in Africa you can't just go to Whole Foods and like buy your pre-made like or your grains or whatever that's like super easy. So she had to like they had to hunt around a lot for like their Whole Foods, and do a lot of the processing themselves. So they would buy peanuts, but they would be in the shells. So she would crack all the shells open, and then she'd do the method where you're blowing all the little like shell skins off and everything, and then she'd roast them. So she had to do all that herself, and she made her own bread, and she did a lot of these like, this processing of their food. And so I don't know, it baptized me into sort of the world of eating more whole foods. And
Yeah.
I have to say my stomach did not agree 100% that first, like those 2 months that I was living there. Like my stomach was kind of like, there's a lot of fiber, and it's kind of, my body's just not used to it.
Yep.
But I mean, it tasted good. So I think that was sort of when I first thought, maybe I can go home and do this. So I remember like I was so excited. They made smoothies a lot, and they had a Vitamix, even though like in Malawi, like the power situation is very tricky. So they had to have like an adapter so that they could use their Vitamix
Okay.
for power, because you can't just like plug it straight in the wall, or else like you'll blow the fuse or whatever.
Yep.
But I was so excited by their Vitamix that I like ordered one like refurbished from Malawi, so that it was there when I got home, so I could immediately start making like smoothies and ice cream and all these things that I loved like while I was in their home. And so yeah, after reading all like Dr. Greger's book and watching Forks Over Knives and kind of being in the research sort of, because I didn't have that much to do when I was there, so I just spent a lot of time learning, I decided I probably could maintain vegetarian. So that I came home and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to eat more vegetarian and get my parents to eat that way too. I remember we had Fresh Prep, like a box service, or HelloFresh. And so we were ordering like vegetarian meals from them. And so, yeah, we did make a bit of an effort, but it wasn't until I came here and like I said, I was teaching that class that I was thinking, well, if this is what I'm telling people they need to eat for health and disease prevention and all of these things, then I probably should be living it out more myself. So
Yeah. Yep.
yeah.
That definitely makes sense. And I know you, and you probably get this question too of like, wow, you're a plant-based dietitian. Where did you go to school to become a plant-based dietitian? And it's like a lot of us who are plant-based dietitians had to do a ton of research on our own, because again, that just wasn't something that was taught. And maybe
Yeah.
I think nowadays it is more part of the curriculum. It's becoming more popular. I think there's still some room for improvement from what I've understand from talking to other people. But a lot of our research was done on our own extensively. And I mean, we were kind of our own test subjects too, to see how we felt and how our bodies reacted. And I think you made a really good point of, especially when you're first starting to eat a lot more plant-based foods, it is a lot more fiber. And so just kind of giving yourself some grace as you go through those first few months of navigating maybe some extra gas, bloating, some different bowel movements, and then kind of getting through that hump can be helpful.
Yeah.
And then Lucy, really quickly, you did say a pro tip that I wanted to highlight is if you want a Vitamix, but you don't want to pay full price for one, the refurbished ones are fantastic. Mine's been going on for, I think, 9 years now, and I couldn't recommend it more. So
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. It works just like a normal one. So
Yes.
it's totally fine. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how has that been being plant-based and the transition, and how is it with your family even now?
I definitely was more of a slow adopter. I always have been in my life. Like I'm never one of those people that just jumps on bandwagons and executes things perfectly. So definitely been more of a slow adopter. And it's just sort of more like the more I hear from people, the more I'm like, I was convinced to do it even better than I was doing it. And so it's just been the steady progression of like, how can I do this even better? Like, how can I, eat less meat or eat less cheese, even if it's just sort of accidental, like I'm out at a restaurant, like how can I actually like ensure that I'm not getting cheese if I don't want it? And like, convincing my in-laws that we really don't like eating meat. So for a long time, she was still giving us stuff. And I think she was a little bit concerned about her son, right? Like he's not going to get enough like protein. So she would try to send us stuff home. She'd be like, here, I just made some like chicken wings, just take them home. And I'd be like, well, okay. But because I was like, culturally, I want to be sensitive and not be like refusing. This is the way she shows love, right? And so, but then we'd end up eating stuff that we didn't really want. And so just slowly over the years, we kind of pushed back a little bit. And it's like, we won't eat this. Like, you'll send it home with us and we'll eat it, but we don't want to eat it. So
Yeah.
we'll just eat meat when we come to your house. And then even from now on, like, we go to her house and she just cooks a lot of like tofu and seafood for us.
Oh,
So she's kind of learned to adapt sort of her Sunday dinner meal for us. And yeah, I can just kind of eat around the meat if there's meat on the table, or,
yeah.
and she never like questions me anymore. Like, how come you're not, try this? Like, you should try this. It's really good. And I'm kind of like, it's okay. I'm pretty happy. Like, I just love vegetables. Like, I just say stuff like, I just love vegetables. I love tofu.
Uh-huh.
Even true like a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago. Because I wasn't like a early lover of tofu, right? And nobody really is. It's kind of an acquired taste.
Yes.
I would just tell her, like, even if it wasn't true, like, I just love tofu.
Uh-huh.
Just more tofu.
Kind of going back to the field of dietetics in general, what's kind of your hope for the future of dietetics?
Yeah, so I find it so encouraging. Like, I come across dietitians who are going plant-based like all the time now, and I know like there's probably thousands of us at this point. Yeah, my hope would be more that as we're studying in school, that it would become more of an emphasis. And it's interesting because we haven't brought up the food guides yet, but
Oh, yeah.
Canada is actually more of like, they have more of a plant-based food guide these days. It's new, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have that much interaction with too many other dietitians here in Canada, so I can't speak for all of them and how they kind of relate to food and plant-based and stuff. But the few that I have interacted with have sort of pushed against that idea of like plant-based being best for everyone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would love just that moving forward, like as the US sort of looks to Canada's guide and here's all this pushback because, people are paying attention, especially as dietitians. Like, we're paying attention to the fact that a lot of the stuff recommended on the food guide it looks kind of questionable to us. Like, it's not very healthy. Like, I was just looking at it before this, and one of the first pictures in the food guide when you open it up for the US is like this bowl of pho. And the first picture has some tofu in it, but it also has meatballs. Then the second picture has meatballs, and you can tell that there's like kind of this grease on the top of the soup.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, for a food guide that's recommending like decreasing saturated fat, and then like to have pictures, pictures are worth 1,000 words. Like, all the pictures in there are going to be sending different messages to the people than what the words are saying on the guide. And so my hope is that they kind of learn, we push back as dietitians, we start asking and lobbying maybe and doing whatever we need to do to sort of maybe even have our own entity separate from the USDA, because we know that that's part of the reason that all these foods end up in the food guide is because it's created by the government entity as all of these subsidies and everything are coming out of, right? So it's very challenging for them to separate their interests, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the US were to sort of be able to, maybe put the dietary guidelines under the NIH or something like that, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Because their concern is actually public health, right? The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is getting some pushback, and I think they're making some changes and making sure that they're not giving their stamp of approval on things that other dietitians are not going to like. So yeah, they've had some pushback, and their sponsors have cleaned up a little bit. Have you ever gotten to FNC, the National Nutrition Conference?
I have. I've gone one time. Have you?
Yeah. I have not.
Okay.
But I went to a California-based one, and so I can kind of see how it was like on a small scale.
Yeah.
But
it's a wild experience. So this is like our big dietitian conference that's held once a year for all dietitians and for many, many food companies as well. So they're down there like vending or as vendors.
Yeah, like thousands of them. And
oh my gosh, so many.
I think, the people at the top of the academy will be like, well, it's the dietitian's responsibility to be able to know the difference between a healthy and unhealthy food, and like kind of know that it's a marketing scheme and everything. Like, it's not really our job to not have these guys come to our events and sponsor, but it is sort of like, that's not how the public perceives it. Like, if you have a list of people who are exhibiting at your event, it's kind of like you're giving them like, oh, okay, we like this, or we give it approval. So for a long time, like McDonald's and Coca-Cola were there, and I don't think they go anymore, is what I've heard. Or other industries that show up, like the sugar industry, and I think Pepsi still goes, and some other things. yeah, Mary Nussle's book, Food Politics, has a whole chapter on the academy.
Oh,
So,
oh, really? Oh, I haven't read
yeah,
that. Oh,
yes.
fascinating. Okay.
So,
That's,
anyway, my hope is that things start changing.
yeah,
We start recognizing the science for what it is and promoting it without any of the sort of complexity that we like to add to things, and just start
right.
like, let's just bring it back to the simple basics of like whole foods are good for us, and we know that intuitively, but
Yeah.
let's start promoting it in our government and our academy and our education.
Yep. Yeah. I couldn't
What
agree
about you?
more. No, I couldn't agree more. And so our USDA dietary guidelines are going to come out in 2025. So every 5 years we have new guidelines that come out. And so
Hmm.
Canada a while ago removed dairy from their guidelines for recommending
Hmm.
dairy. And then from what I understand, Mexico recently did that as well. So Mexico and Canada, their guidelines are much more plant forward and much more
Hmm.
inclusive in my opinion. And so I would love to see our guidelines when they come out in 2025 to not continue to recommend dairy. So there are
Hmm.
about six, I don't know if you call them food groups anymore, basically six categories of food that they still recommend, and dairy is one of them. They have included lactose-free versions like fortified soy milk and different things, but the fact that they're still recommending dairy and they're still recommending protein foods like lean meats, poultry and eggs and seafood, it's a little frustrating. But the funny thing is red meat is not on there. So they include lean meats, and so of course that's sort of up for debate and how you want to define that. But it's
Yeah.
also interesting too. I just feel like there's so much conflicting information because at the same time they talk about limiting foods that are high in saturated fat, high in sodium, and the main sources of these foods are meat, pizza, which has a lot of cheese on it,
Mm.
poultry, dairy is the number one source of saturated fat in the American diet. And so I would definitely like to see some things change. I'm actually very hopeful. I don't know if you are, Lucy, but I'm very hopeful for these 2025 guidelines. I really think that they're going to be a bit more plant forward, and I'm hoping that they care more, kind of like what you were saying, more about the public's health
Hmm.
versus money in their pockets, because there's
Yeah.
just a lot of intertwine there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if that has to do with the reason why Canada's are plant forward is because we have public health care, right? So the government knows if they promote things that lead to ill health, then they have to pay for it
Oh,
in
yeah.
public health care. So I kind of wonder. And I was going to say that what I see as the main difference between the two guidelines is it's like sort of the ease. Like in Canada, you can just go to their website and they have a little snapshot option, and it's like it's very interactive, and you can kind of click these buttons and kind of just get this really clear, simple picture of like this is how you eat to be healthy. And if you started eating sort of according to their guideline, it would be like you would start having a better health. Like it would just start to improve, even if you were still
Yep.
including some lean meats and eggs and stuff, because they recommend at least half your plate coming from, or three-quarters of your plate coming from plant food. So yeah,
Wow. Oh,
yeah. But then when you start looking at the USDA, you can tell that there's lobbyists kind of saying we don't like that language. Like you got to make
oh,
it a little
yeah.
bit confusing, right? Like
Yep.
so the public's like, what's saturated fat? And I pulled some sentences from the USDA guide. Let me see if I can find
Oh,
it.
yes. Please, please pull them up.
Focus on meeting food group needs with nutrient dense foods and beverages and stay within calorie limits. And then dietary components of public health concern for underconsumption, current inadequate intake of nutrient dense foods and beverages across food groups has resulted in underconsumption of some nutrients. And basically, they're just talking about how we're lacking fiber and vitamin D and potassium and calcium, but it's like they just use such confusing language that
Yep.
like the mass public is going to be like, what does that even mean? I barely even know what they're trying to communicate, right?
Yeah, it's not direct at all. It is
Yeah.
very confusing and very vague. It's like, well, what if I'm supposed to eat less saturated fat? Well, what foods am I supposed to eat less of so that I eat less saturated fat? Because a lot of people don't know that plants don't contain saturated fats. Most plants don't, and that a lot
Right.
of animal products do. And so, yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I know, yeah. So even there's a switch just like when they're talking about protein foods in the Canadian guide, they list plant-based proteins first and then they say like lean meats and seafood. So even if
Oh,
that's the only switch we see in 2025, like
that would be
we just
amazing.
yeah, just eat more of these. They're really good sources of protein.
Yep.
Then that would be a wonderful switch, you know.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, because so for
Yeah.
our guidelines, you're right. They're still recommending the meats first and then the fortified soy milks after. And the same with dairy. They're recommending fat-free or low-fat milk, which I still don't know why they recommend that.
I don't think they have beans listed as a protein food on the USDA guide.
Yeah.
It's only soy foods, and I kind of wonder if that has to do with the soy industry in the US as well.
Oh, that's interesting too.
Like
Yeah,
they
could be.
don't,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. And historically, I know there are a lot of people with deep pockets that would sit on these boards that would sort of guide the dietary guidelines. I know thankfully that is changing. There's much more diversity in these people, in the people who are making these decisions, which is great. But I think, as always, there could be some room for improvement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Lucy, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights. I think we could talk about the dietary guidelines all day.
Yes.
I'm very curious, though, for you to share just your information, and if people want to connect with you, potentially work with you, where would be the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so so if you're in Alberta, then I do have my private practice virtual here, but I don't want to leave out everybody else in North America or even in Europe or Australia. So I've decided to open up a 12-week health improvement program. So we focus on primarily weight loss, but using a plant-based diet to lose weight easily while still having large portions, as we know is like the best part about eating a plant-based diet is you can eat pretty much all you want. And if you kind of stick to plant-based foods, you feel really full and you get to still like have all the benefits and the energy and the confidence and all these things that come with just losing weight. So yeah, so that's my 12-week program, and any information about that is available on my Instagram or my Facebook. I'm a little bit more active on Facebook these days, so if you want to find me there, my URL is Health Coach Lucy Liu. My Instagram is Plant Forward Weight Loss, and my Facebook group is also group/Plant Forward Weight Loss as well. So
Perfect.
yeah, hopefully you can join, and we can make a connection if you're interested, especially in learning a little bit more about the weight loss side of a plant-based diet.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll include all those links in the show notes so you can easily access and connect with Lucy. Thank you again so much for coming on and chatting and sharing your story and all the things. I really appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you hosting me, because I doubt that anybody would find my story interesting, but you make me feel special. So thank you.
I loved your story. You're so welcome.
Yeah.
The more plant-based stories we can share, the better. So
yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Until next time, keep thriving.